as with all things in large institutions like the National Health Service or even the university sector, I eventually got rather burned out and it was all very bureaucratic. So I decided to leave the university and set up my own company to provide courses for midwives. We'd got to a stage where women were asking about complementary therapies in pregnancy and didn't know where to get the help. Midwives were trying to help them but didn't know where to get their own training. And that's what I've been doing for the last 18 years.
You've just met the wonderful and incredibly insightful Dr. Denise Tiran, and you're listening to the LabAroma podcast with me, your host, Colleen Quinn. At LabAroma, we believe the secret to truly effective and therapeutic plant medicine is by understanding our plant science and backing that up with evidence. And the lady we sit with today is a huge fan of medicine, a huge fan of complementary therapy, and is evidence-based in the decades of work she has built her life working upon. Denise is a freelance midwifery lecturer and internationally renowned author, an authority on complementary therapies in the midwifery space. She has been pioneering this subject from an academic and professional specialisation since the 1980s. She is the founder, chief executive officer and educational director for her company, Expectancy. She provides a unique range of certified complementary therapy courses for midwives in the UK and a register of midwives offering complementary therapy services privately across the UK, working under Expectancy's licensed consultancy scheme. She also regularly teaches in Japan, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong and elsewhere in the world. So Denise has amazing books out there. One of them is still one that I lean into, one of those textbooks that just is a go-to for me when it comes to pregnancy and anything related to that stage in a woman's life. She has written numerous textbooks as well on complementary therapy for midwifery, and she has over 80 professional journal papers and 3 books for expectant mothers. Denise has 18 years experience in managing her own business and has won the runner-up to the 1915 Kent Women in Business Awards. She now mentors midwives, helping them set up their own private complementary therapy services under her Expectancy licensed consultancy scheme, as I mentioned. Her work has been dedicated to the space of midwifery and complementary therapy, and it is an honour to sit with her today to talk about the work she is doing, the work she has done, and how she has seen this world evolve. Okay, Denise, thank you so much for doing the LabAroma podcast with me. I'm so excited to have you here. It's been a very long time since I've seen you in person, so it's even nicer to see you on cyberspace so many years later. So thank you for doing this for me.
Thank you for asking me.
It's my pleasure. Can we jump straight into complementary therapies and all things pregnancy?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So can we go back to the start, Denise? What stimulated or what was the motivation behind your original interest in complementary therapies?
It sort of came to me from a very unusual direction, I suppose, really. I'd always wanted to be a midwife from about the age of 15, although we had no midwives or nurses in the family. So I trained as a nurse and then as a midwife. And then after a while, I moved to a central London hospital, which was incredibly interventionist. And we were going through a time in the early 1980s when there was a lot of intervention in childbirth, possibly more than there is now, actually. And I just found the unit I was working in, teaching, I found it very, very difficult to work there. There were campaigns by midwives and parents on Hampstead Heath, and I went on these marches to say we want more physiological birth, more normal, natural birth. Mm-hmm. So I suppose that's what started it, really. And I went into teaching fairly early in my career. I had worked for a brief while as a community midwife in Surrey, and then went into teaching in London. And I decided, for some unknown reason, to do a massage course, which I loved. And that led to all the other therapies. I'm sure you know that once you're involved, the others sort of follow along behind.
Yep.
So I then went to do what I thought was a reflexology course, but turned out to be a very specific clinical style of reflex zone therapy, which was originated in Germany and fits very well with midwifery. And at the time, I was still breastfeeding my son, who was about 9 months old. And on the day of when we were looking at the endocrine gland points on the feet, I found that I produced far more milk than I needed. And it was almost like I was 3rd or 4th day postnatal. And I think that was my aha experience. And I started to look at how reflexology and massage would apply to midwifery and to maternity care. And then we were at a stage where midwifery and nursing education had transferred into the higher education sector. So I moved into what eventually became the University of Greenwich in London, and was teaching midwifery, and then had the opportunity to develop some extra programs for qualified midwives and nurses. And because I had studied these therapies at a time when there was an increasing interest, both amongst pregnant women and midwives, I was given the opportunity to develop a degree in complementary therapies. I carried on studying. I did an aromatherapy course, which actually wasn't terribly good. Lovely teacher, lovely lady, but she couldn't really teach. And we were sort of self-taught, I suppose. So it went on from there, and I studied herbal medicine and homeopathy, not to qualification level, but I looked at them and incorporated them into my clinical work. And I set up a clinic in one of the local maternity units to offer complementary therapies. Interestingly, because I was only there 1 day a week, it couldn't be just for anybody to come and have a nice relaxing treatment. It was specific for, the discomforts of pregnancy, fear of labour, breastfeeding problems, that sort of thing. So that clinic ran for about 10 years, 1 day a week. And I was continuing to study therapies. I learned acupuncture and hypnosis, which I've never used in practice. But I was looking at a whole range of different therapies. And so I was, loving that, teaching students and having a fantastic time. But as with all things in large institutions like the National Health Service or even the university sector, I eventually got rather burned out, and it was all very bureaucratic. So I decided to leave the university and set up my own company to provide courses for midwives. We'd got to a stage where women were asking about complementary therapies in pregnancy and didn't know where to get the help. Midwives were trying to help them but didn't know where to get their own training. And that's what I've been doing for the last 18 years. Training midwives. I have a team, and we offer a whole range of courses specifically for midwives to be able to introduce different complementary therapies into pregnancy and birth care. And we also now, because of the state of the National Health Service, we have a lot of midwives wanting to offer them privately. So we also provide business training for midwives who want to leave the NHS as well. So it's been a long road, but
very good.
Great fun.
A long road, but a very, very beneficial and purposeful road.
I like to think so. And I like to think that although I no longer do any direct clinical work, obviously I'm helping the midwives to help the parents. So I like to think that it's continuing in that way. Really.
Yeah. Which is lovely. Can I take you back to something you said, and I completely agree with you, which is that once you do one therapy, I don't know how this happens, you just end up in a snowball where you do so many. And I spent my entire 20s and my early 30s just building that snowball, which it sounds like you did as well. How beneficial has that been for you over the years, Denise, to have touched so many different modalities, even some that aren't to qualification level, but is still to a knowledge-based level? How beneficial has that been for you in your work?
I think it's given me a whole range of tools. I mean, at the baseline, I am a midwife, and therefore I have to work within the regulations for midwives. But it's given me a whole range of tools, and I think I learned more about maternity care and pregnancy and birth and the way people approach it from having so much exposure to parents who were coming for therapies for different problems, but actually saw that there was this opportunity to sit and talk to somebody, at a time when many midwives didn't have the time to sit for ages with them. I could give them that time, and it didn't really matter which therapy I used, to be honest, but I find that often they complement each other. They work well together. But of course, you've also then got choices for the parents. So if somebody doesn't like having their feet touched, there's no point in offering them reflexology. I have had problems where, well, I wouldn't say problems, but I've had situations where a woman's perhaps rejected homeopathy because of her particular spiritual or moral beliefs, because it's often seen more as a new era type of therapy. And I think just being able to say, well, certain therapies work better for certain conditions. So I would probably use reflexone therapy for musculoskeletal problems, backache, sciatica, pelvic girdle pain in pregnancy. But I might use something like Bach flower remedies and homeopathy for emotional problems. Or I might go down the relaxation element and offer massage and therapy and manual therapies like that. So they have that time to relax. They get a bit of me time, really. So I don't have one therapy for one condition. I will quite often combine them. So I might provide something at an appointment and provide that treatment, and then perhaps send them home with advice to use different elements of natural remedies or something like that.
You make it sound like it just gives you a far greater diversity of a toolkit, so that whatever is presented to you in every scenario, there's something you can rummage through that box and find as a solution.
Yes, and I think it's fair to say that sometimes it's appropriate just to revert to standard maternity midwifery practice, or even referral to the obstetrician if there is a referral. But it's nothing to be able to give either a mix and match sort of approach or choices for the parents. I think that, I really do feel that choice is fundamental to good maternity care, actually.
Well, it's in the word complementary. It's not alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really valid point, because it has to go alongside what the midwives and obstetricians are doing. It almost can't be separated. And we always try to say to parents, if you are having therapy from somebody independently of the NHS maternity services, please do let us know. They don't always, but it is better if we do know what they're having.
Absolutely, of course. So let's dig into this a tiny bit deeper. So complementary therapies are used, and so many different ones that we've touched on already, are used at all of those beautiful stages, whether it's conception, pregnancy, and childbirth. In your experience, and you're the one woman I see with having the vast amount of experience in this field, is there a particular therapy that you've seen to be most helpful in those, I'll call them 3 stages, the conception, the pregnancy, and the childbirth? Is there anything in particular you kind of lean into for those stages?
Well, although I don't practice acupuncture at the moment, I would say acupuncture and herbal remedies are best for the preconception preparation, where you can bring in vitamins and minerals and dietary advice. And if people are struggling, then I do think, and there's plenty of evidence to show, that herbal remedies are particularly good for various fertility issues. And acupuncture not only relaxes, but may deal with hormonal differences where people are struggling to get pregnant. And I think those two, herbal medicine and acupuncture, under qualified practitioner supervision, can be really, really helpful in that early stage. Insofar as pregnancy is concerned, I think it really depends what it is. If somebody is wanting relaxation, then massage and aromatherapy and possibly reflexology all combine together, and they can be very helpful. But if they've got a particular problem, so they're feeling sick or they've got constipation or backache or something, then there are other therapies which may be more effective. And certainly in the UK, I think osteopathy and chiropractic are particularly good for musculoskeletal problems. Okay. Although they are no longer classified as complementary therapies, they're now professions allied to healthcare. On the other hand, a nice massage, oils that are pain relieving, and specific points on the feet from reflexology might also be really effective. For labour, I think aromatherapy comes into its own, to be honest. I do a lot of teaching for midwifery units where they want to introduce an element of aromatherapy within labour care. The other big issue at the moment is post-dates pregnancy, women who are overdue, or women who are not quite overdue but are being threatened with an induction of labour for quite spurious reasons. And to be able to use aromatherapy, massage, acupressure, and possibly some reflexology, that can be really positive and effective. And I do a lot of teaching with that package of combined therapies to encourage midwives to use it to help women get into labour or to progress at labour once it's started. Postnatally, I think the surveys show that actually new parents are less likely to use the therapies, although, of course, for things like lactation and wound healing and recovery from birth, anything really, I don't think there's anything I would particularly specify as being the best. But those tend to be the times when women will use complementary therapies. They've got more to think about than actually worrying about doing this, that, and the other. Although we would love to encourage them to take some time for themselves. I do wonder if the current emphasis on mental health and well-being, we could do so much for those women who are, they've got postnatal blues or they're verging on the edge of diagnosis, depression and things like that. But it will depend. Clinical hypnosis is extremely good for depression, both pregnancy and postnatal. It's also really good for things like fear of labour or fear of needles and stopping smoking in pregnancy and that sort of thing. So, it is about a range of therapies that are relevant and acceptable to the woman, but also that we know can be effective and possibly used together as well.
It's kind of unfortunate that it drops off in postnatal care. I completely understand why, having had sisters that have babies, sleep is a priority, not sleep, latching, all of those things. It becomes a whole new world of things. Even with second, third, and fourth babies, there becomes this world of stuff that needs to get done and needs to be considered. And complementary therapy is very, very far down that list. But I do agree with you that it'd be interesting to know if some level of therapy, even if it was just touch or some even self aromatherapy, was maintained, how much would that help with just even the stress of postnatal care?
Absolutely. I think being a new parent today is so stressful. There's this sort of the social media and the publicity ways, it seems to you've got to be perfect, don't they? And women get more worried about being perfect than actually concentrating on common sense and learning to love their baby and enjoy parenthood. It's so soon over.
And love their body. I see a lot of pressure on social media for women that have had babies to get their body back. And I don't have children, so I say this with a pinch of salt because I don't want to, I don't know what it's like. But love your body. It's produced a baby. You will never get your old body back again. It's a goddess. It's evolved into this whole other realm. And I think the pressure must feel just unnecessarily overwhelming.
I think also, because so many women have got to get back to work or they want to go back to work, we don't honour parenthood as much as we ought to, I feel. And we certainly don't honour women's bodies and women's role in being a parent. And it doesn't mean you've got to give up work, but it might mean some compromise somewhere. And I think, unfortunately, social pressure doesn't facilitate women to do that very easily these days. It's all mad. And the one thing you can't control is pregnancy, birth, and the early days with a new baby. You just can't control it like everything else.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Okay, I want to take you on a slightly different line of conversation. And you always have been, even when I'd done a course with you years and years ago, you've this strong commitment, and you communicate very strongly about the importance of safety and professional accountability and evidence-based practice. And I love that about you, Denise. I've always loved that about you, and it's very strong in your book. But you wrote a blog recently about, the compassionate use of complementary therapies. Can you talk to me a wee bit about, what is the compassionate use of complementary therapies, and how can we practice that within, using natural and complementary botanical therapies as well? Like, that's all become a very common practice now. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yes, I do feel very strongly that sometimes complementary therapies are played with, and there is an impression that because they're natural, they're completely safe. And I think that feeling spreads not only to the parents that we work with, but also the staff, so the midwives and sometimes the doctors too, actually. But I feel that compassionate care is about choice for parents. It's about helping them achieve the most satisfying pregnancy, birth, and early parenthood period as they can. But we have to accept that in maternity care, when we use complementary therapies, they are an intervention in the normal process. And, I always say to my students, if it has the power to do good, it also has the power to do harm when it's not used appropriately or correctly. And it worries me tremendously that we are seeing a lot of misuse of therapies, and essential oils, aromatherapy oils, are by far the most problematic, I would say. Some of that is the parents, and it comes from what they're reading on the internet or, their friends tell them or whatever. And increasingly, I am extremely concerned that it's coming from midwives, generally who are not fully trained aromatherapists. They've done 1 or 2 days of aromatherapy, enough to help them, perhaps use it in labour or whatever. But they're not thinking beyond the niceness. And I think aromatherapy is the biggest problem because it's so lovely and the oils smell nice. They have no understanding of using essential oils in an institutional setting like a maternity unit or a birth centre. And they are wafting their oils around injudiciously. They are, saying that it's okay to have diffusers in all the public areas. And yet they're not really understanding that you should always individualise your complementary therapies to the person who's going to receive it. The one problem with aromatherapy is whoever's exposed to the vapours is actually inhaling the chemicals. So, and I feel that whilst I have spent nearly 40 years promoting the use of complementary therapies in pregnancy and birth, it does worry me these days that we've got what I call enthusiastic amateurs wanting to do so much for the parents and actually not doing it in quite the way that they should do. It's not quite fitting in with their midwifery accountability under the Nursing and Midwifery Council. It's not quite fitting into the way that aromatherapists would work with parents, because aromatherapists tend to be in a clinic with a single woman or single person in a single room where you can, be far more flexible. But when you're in a maternity unit or even a birth centre, you've got to consider everybody there. And I think this is not what I would consider to be fully compassionate. They may say, oh yeah, I'm being really compassionate, I'm providing lovely relaxation therapies and what have you, but they haven't understood the science behind the therapies. They haven't understood the legal aspects around things like aromatherapy or equipment from needles in acupuncture or something like that. And it worries me. It's my biggest worry, actually. And I find that having spent most of my career promoting it and trying to get more and more people interested to use it, I'm almost backtracking to a certain extent these days and saying, well, okay, it's wonderful, but hold on a second. Let's think about how we're going to do this cautiously and not go in like a bull in a china shop and try and do everything. You can't do everything.
Because, that bull in the china shop approach, to use your term, has the potential, Denise, long term to undo all the good of aromatherapy in this space, which would be an awful pity if that happened. Is the solution not that? So this conversation really scares me, because one part of me is saying the safety, the chemist in me is saying aromatherapy should not be used, especially in this setting, unless there is a qualified aromatherapist, if not even a clinical aromatherapist in the administering, because yes, they're lovely, but they're incredibly powerful, potent, precious oil materials that are packed with phytochemicals. So the thought of midwives with all the wonderful good intention in the world that have a few days training under their belt in aromatherapy, using them in this environment, I just find it wholly inappropriate.
Yes, I mean, when I'm teaching, I teach to very set criteria, which sets it in the context of midwifery practice, in the context of using it in an institutional setting, in the context of the law, things like control of substances hazardous to health, and medicines management principles and things like that. But unfortunately, I do have a reputation of being, I think they would say, negative. And I recently had one of our students who's very, very professional, and she's a midwifery manager. She's doing our diploma program. But she said, one of the midwives who'd done a course with me online, she'd asked her if she'd enjoyed it. And she said, well, no, not really, because it was so negative. It was all about safety. And the other midwife said, well, don't you understand that actually safety is paramount? And I think it's a shame. You don't get it with something like acupuncture, where midwives are trained in acupuncture. So we offer a 6-month program, and it's not full qualification as an acupuncturist. It is specifically for midwifery acupuncture, but you don't get the same sort of feeling and the same sort of maverickness, for want of a better word, as you do with aromatherapy. And I think that's because aromatherapy is so nice, so lovely, and I think we'll fragrance the environment, but they haven't recognized that they may have a ventilation system that needs to be taken into account or something like that. Diffusers cause me grave concerns. Because
they take away the individual treatment diffusers. It's no longer individual in that setting, and that's what the problem is.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I do my best and try and promote the education of midwives as much as possible. Unfortunately, changes in midwifery training mean that any mention of complementary therapies has actually been taken out of the standards that are used by the Nursing and Midwifery Council to advise universities what they include in the training programs. It's in there very implicitly, but it's not in there as an explicit thing. And I feel really that student midwives need a good introduction to the subject, because so many pregnant women are using therapies, particularly herbs and natural remedies, herbal teas and things like that. So I would like to see an introductory session included in midwifery training. And I'm not talking about, having a lovely day sitting around doing massage. I'm talking about covering their professional responsibilities when women are, maybe bringing their own oils into the labour ward, or asking about raspberry leaf tea or something like that. commonly these days they're trying to use clary sage oil to get themselves into labour, or castor oil or something like that.
Yeah.
I think those are the sort of things that students need to have, and midwives at the point of registration need to have that. And then I believe really that going further into complementary therapies is actually a post-registration activity. So I'd like to see it offered as a standard choice for midwives to train further in once they're qualified. I don't think it's appropriate to put it all into midwifery training. I think it's something they do after they're qualified. And it's the other end of the spectrum from caring for women with high-risk pregnancies, or, women who've got complex needs for their pregnancy. So it's part of a whole spectrum of care that midwives can provide, and it is a specialism. But I do sometimes get quoted as saying aromatherapy is an accident waiting to happen in
I am. Well, I'm very empathetic to your standpoint, because I know people will say that sometimes I can be doom and gloom, but it's just because they are so powerful and so effective when used in the right hands and with the right intention. But when not, they can be dangerous. My fear is that they're being consistently used badly in the world, that I don't want to undo or remove them from our ability to use them, when we are by people that are qualified. So I don't know, I think we have to watch that. And I agree with you, it's aromatherapy is of all of the complementary therapies, aromatherapy feels like the maverick, or it's been used like a maverick, and that definitely concerns me as well. So I sit with you on that boat.
I think it's particularly difficult when there are certain resources and companies or what have you that are advocating essential oils in ways that are totally inappropriate, saying
absolutely
taken by mouth or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aromatherapy is about respiratory and dermal administration, and it doesn't involve all the other things that are part of herbal medicine, really.
Yeah. Okay, let me take you, last question. I want to take you to a slightly different world. You've done this for decades, Denise, so I feel like you're the woman qualified to answer this one for me. Surely you see a great difference, and I'm going to assume you do, in the mothers that you would have seen in the earlier part of your career to mothers now. Women are putting babies and motherhood on hold for their careers, or because they want to see the world, or for whatever reason they now have the liberation to do, which is great. But there's a whole new world now of what they call geriatric mothers, which I just think is a hilarious term, but geriatric mothers. And then also women that are slightly older than what they used to be, trying to conceive, struggling to conceive. How have you seen this change? Also women having children solo as a choice. How have you seen this whole world evolve in the decades that you've been there?
I think it's a really interesting question. And, when I was first a midwife in the late 1970s, women just left things to choice and, to chance.
Yeah.
And, if they got pregnant, they got pregnant. Sadly, if they lost a baby, well, they pick themselves up and start again. They often did not go back to work after having a baby. And they also, I have to say, did acknowledge the expertise of the people who were caring for them, and they would be prepared to take advice. I think what's happening these days is, you're right, they leave it very long and late until they want to get pregnant. And they're so stressed about it by then. They're probably living a fairly stressful work-life balance, and they leave it until they're in their late 30s or early 40s, or possibly even longer. They expect to get pregnant straight away, and they expect that pregnancy is going to go swimmingly without any problems. And they don't realise that the discomforts that you experience, the sickness and the backache and everything else, actually means you've got good hormone levels, which will, maintain the pregnancy for you. Yeah. They then expect to go into labour on the due date, give birth either without any pain relief or with everything that we can throw at them. And then they get up, go home, get back in their size 6 jeans. The baby's going to breastfeed completely every 4 hours, go to sleep in between, And I think there is an element of not being realistic. Their expectations are perhaps not managed very well, and it's really rather sad that the roles have been lost a little under all this, this trying to be the superwoman and do everything and work, do your work and look after a baby and then maybe have another one and look after your partner if you've got one, and this sort of thing. And I think it's not a very easy time for expectant parents, and I would include the partners in that too. I think there's an awful lot of pressure on partners of either gender. We've got differences there with gender variations.
Of course.
And I think there's so much going on in the world in terms of what roles are meant to be, and yet we actually, I don't think we're particularly helping people. That's perhaps a slightly old-fashioned view. I don't know, but
it's perfect. I literally wanted to know how you've seen it change, and I love how you say in the old days, or back when you started the old days. I shouldn't say that. My mother had me for that.
The old days.
But you left it to chance. Like, I listened to my mother talk about conceiving us 5 compared to my sisters conceiving their children and having them and starting to raise them, and it's a completely different world. And I can see it even get from my girlfriends that are in that mindset where they're thinking about it now. It's even different again from, say, my sister whose first child is 10. Yes. They're thinking about doing it on their own. They're thinking about, we're going to have a water birth, and I'm thinking, you haven't conceived. what are you having a birth plan for? And do you really want to consider a water birth at 42? And I like how you refer to the superwoman mentality. It's the longer we leave it, the more we do feel like we're superwomen, because our career, we've worked at being superwomen in our careers and in our relationships and in our homes, and we own homes and all of those things. I think women are very, very different now, and that leads to a very different experience when it comes to conceiving and delivering and raising babies.
I think there's also a big pressure from the professionals. Not that we intend to put that pressure on people, but people are frightened of the maternity services, and they feel they're going to be coerced into something like having an induction or whatever it might be, which to a certain extent, I'm afraid to say, is probably true. Certainly induction, people are often forced into them without understanding that they have the option to say no.
Okay.
And so there's that tremendous, I've got to do this myself quickly before the doctors start saying I've got to do something else, have a cesarean or whatever it might be, So there is pressure, and it's pressure from all sides, and social media is absolutely dreadful in terms of that. There's so many awful stories around on the internet, aren't there?
And why, Denise, sorry, just to go back on something, why is induction something that is favoured by the maternity services? Is there a reason, or?
Well, I think it comes from the so-called research and medical experiences that show that occasionally going very overdue is not good for baby or mother. On the other hand, I do think whilst there are some people in whom it is truly justified, the biggest thing is about how far overdue can we go. And this is what causes such stress. So they start getting stressed at 35, 36 weeks of pregnancy. And when they still haven't had the baby by 41 or 42 weeks, they're so stressed out, their body won't allow them to go into labour spontaneously. And then the doctor's saying, well, we'll book you in for an induction next Thursday. And I do feel that this is definitely where complementary therapies can come in, to keep those women calm and allow their body to do its own work. That's what a female body is meant to do.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult. Yeah. There are going to be some changes, I believe, because there's been a lot of research. There's a very, very comprehensive review of 16 years worth of inductions done by a professor in Australia with some UK professors as well. And some of the spurious reasons why women are coerced into induction, like the doctor's on holiday, or we haven't got the right rooms, or this sort of thing. Non-clinical, non-medical reasons to artificially start the labour. But I think we are seeing a bit of a sea change now. I think that, people are beginning to recognise that intervention leads to further intervention. You get what we call a cascade of different things happening and having to act on the next stage and the next stage until, you've done everything you can. And it leaves parents with a less than satisfying experience, and that's what we should be doing. We should be helping parents to, given that some will only have one baby, it's got to be as good as it can get for them, given within the boundaries of their medical condition. If they've got a disease or a condition that makes it more complicated, but actually this is possibly their only chance to experience pregnancy and birth, and we should be trying to make it the best possible experience for them.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to end as well. Denise, thank you so much, not just for sharing your thoughts and your very honest insights with us on the podcast, but for the decades of work you've done. Your work is so important, and you've always been my pioneer in the midwifery space. I very nearly went down the complementary therapy midwife route when I was in my early 20s. I chose a different route, but that was my plan B. And if I had done it, I would have stuck to you like glue. So it's a real honour to interview you today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's lovely to chat with you.
What a beautiful interview with Denise. I've followed Denise ever since I studied with her in London years ago, and she's always been my North Star when it comes to complementary therapies and midwifery care and dealing with ladies that are going through fertility, pregnancy and postnatal. If you enjoyed this interview, make sure you share it with friends and family, and you can tag us on social media at LabAroma on Instagram or Facebook. You can also rate and review this episode over on Spotify, iTunes or Google Podcast, and you can subscribe on any of those platforms so you never miss an episode again. Until next time, take care.